I mean, endings have been on my mind for a little while. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, they've been on my mind ever since I started writing, but more so lately because now that I've accumulated enough work to look back on and try and think about critically, it just feels like, oh yeah, I will charge into pieces. I will Theodore Roosevelt up the hill with my sword drawn, yelling bully. It's just coming down the hill. I don't know how to. I always struggle with the ending. So, yeah, why not talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Do you have any endings, whether it's famous stories or stories that you love, that you kind of point back to and go, wow, that if I could replicate that in my work, that would be awesome. Or, even one that you've written, what's a good ending?
I just sort of laughing at the fact, or one that you've written. Well, yes, as I reach into my
That's right.
extensive publication,
my vast library of knowledge,
my vast, I think of a couple endings. The first one I feel the most satisfied I've ever been is the ending of Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. And I have always been a ginormous Italo Calvino fan, much to my own writing's detriment because I've spent so much time being like, well, what would he do here? Very satisfying ending, a really, really great book. But whenever I also think of endings, I can't help but think of that episode of The Simpsons where I think Homer becomes the voice of Poochie. And so the character Poochie is suddenly eliminated, and they just have him, the animation cell goes up, and then a sign that comes up that says, Poochie went back to his home world and lived happily ever after, or something like that. Very much one of those, like, quick fix TV endings for plot lines that need to be stopped. If anyone here is familiar with The Expanse, do you know The Expanse, Art?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The TV show. Did you watch all the way through?
I did. I don't recall the ending, because it's been a little while.
There was, let's step into some controversial hot water here. Why not? But there was an actor who was found to be maybe doing some questionable things in his own private time, and so he was one of the.
Yeah. And they wrote him out?
They wrote him out in like the most Poochie-esque kind of way, I guess is where I was going with that. So, yeah, endings are tricky. Obviously, that's TV, that's film. The Simpsons making fun of last-minute crazy endings. But, that's why I was initially in love with and drawn to Had Literary Magazine, because so many of the writers there were doing things that when the ending came, when I finished that piece, I would just be like, oh my gosh, like, holy cow. There's the lead singer of Living Colour, I've talked about him before, Corey Glover. In an interview once, he said their first album, Living Colour's first album, has a computer-generated head on it with a bunch of rays that sort of emanate from it, like sunbeams on a kid's drawing. And he said that head is what it feels like to hear music live. And for me, I use that metaphor all the time. Had Literary Magazine makes my head just emanate sunbeams.
Okay. Yeah, it does not do it does not do that for me. In fact, I find that many of the things I read on Had leave me wanting more. I find that the endings are more stop than completion, stop versus conclusion. They just sort of end, and I find them very frustrating. Yeah.
Do you think that's because, and this is something that I had to understand about myself, so I'm only asking because this is my experience. When I first discovered microfiction and works that, we're going to go into the general idea of flash fiction being a short story, something that's like 1,000 words or longer, and then microfiction being something that might be 500 words or less, I had to make that kind of adjustment and say, wow, this didn't have much of a completion, but it has an ending that resonates with me emotionally. Is it, do you feel the same way that it might just be the delivery system?
We talked about this with Eric Scott Tryon, and it was the idea that we posited, which he liked, was the concept of an echo, that when a story ends, it kind of has a life beyond the page, is what he said, and we referred to that as an echo. And I like to think of it technically, like as a technique, a function of technique, is that when you read a story, you go as far as you need to in order to know how it resolves, and that's where you stop. Because sometimes if you write the entire thing, it's boring to see it play out because you know how it's going to play out. Case in point, I think in our last episode, we were talking about a story that I had written where I could have cut the back half of it off and it would have been fine. Better, actually, because I played out this entire scenario that wasn't necessary to play out. The reader knew exactly what was going to happen. This guy tried to buy, flowers for his girlfriend and it went poorly. And you didn't need to watch it go poorly. You knew it was going to go poorly. And so you could have just stopped a lot sooner. So I think that's what we're getting at, is where do you stop, and how does that ending land emotionally, or I guess intellectually, but I guess really more emotionally. I think that's what people respond to more, is kind of that's why they call it a gut punch, that gut punch at the end. That's not really an intellectual thing. You get punched in the gut, like, oh, wow, that hurt. Let me think about the various muscles that contracted when that hurt. Like, no, dude.
But I mean, maybe it also has something to do with the style of writing that you enjoy. You as in the royal you. I'm thinking, for me, I love using Had Lit Mag as a sort of template, as a thing to shoot for, as the endings that I really appreciate. Literary magazines like Gone Lawn, those types of magazines. When I read those writers, I'm like, wow, that's why I was so excited when I finally understood that there were lit mags out there that you could go to Submittable on and find and discover, and it's that work, obviously, of finding the lit mags that are. Are you okay? You're okay. That's the work, of course, is finding the lit mags that really speak to you. Maybe you're somebody that likes the way, for example, if I'm a big Italo Calvino fan, I'm going to go try and find any lit mag or any authors that kind of have a similar style, because that's how I like my pieces to end, with that sort of emotional gut punch, if you will. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe it's different for everyone, although there is a general consensus that there has to be some sort of satisfying quality to it, regardless of where you're submitting. Correct? Yeah.
I mean, the satisfaction, I think, is where you get the wide variability in sort of, do I want something that wraps up nice and neat in a bow? I mean, we go back to our conversation with Eric Scott Tryon, and he said even within his own household, the stories that he's writing aren't satisfying to all of the readers in his house, like it's just, there's absolutely a personal preference that plays into this. And that's why when I say, I don't like most of the stories on Had because of the way they end, that has zero relevance in the world. Like, nobody cares. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all whether I like them or not. Other than what am I going to go find to read? And I still go back there on occasion because I've been wrong before, and some of the stories, land well, but there's a lot of, I'm very finicky anyway. So I kind of expect that most things that I read aren't going to have the kind of ending that I want, because there's a certain type of ending I'm shooting for. And sometimes I'm skilled enough to do it, and most of the time I'm not. So there you go. But most of my endings are bummers. That's it. Like, you just describe my endings in one word, bummer. Yeah. And those are the ones that really, it's like I have an empty puzzle piece inside me. And when somebody writes a story with a bummer ending, that fits the whole inside of me. I'm like, oh yeah, that reinforces my worldview that most things are bummers. So who knows? It is what it is. Like the end of Gatsby, I think that's why it hits me so hard, because it's that line. I forget. I need to tear a corner off my degree now, but it's something about being born ceaselessly into the past. And it's just the way he kind of wraps the whole book up with this kind of wistful bummer ending. And I'm like, oh my God, it's amazing. So, I like that. So I kind of seek that out. But really, it's about just the satisfying completion of a story is, what does the writer set up and how does it pay off? And that can be completely different from story to story. And sometimes it's a comedic payoff and sometimes it's more dramatic. Sometimes it's tragic. There are no limits here. It's just, what kind of payoff are you setting up and are you able to execute that payoff? That's really what we're getting at.
Yeah. And when I'm working on pieces and I'm stuck by an ending, there are several things that I've picked up that I continually forget about, and I have to remember them. It's so funny that I'll just be like struggling with a piece. So I'm just kind of wondering if you have anything that you like to look back on. So for example, for a while, I think it was like all of 2024, I got into this whole thing of take your first sentence and make it the title, and then cut the last sentence of your piece and see where that leaves you. And I found that, number one, it gave me a lot more immediacy. And number two, I was finding that I was trying to give a summary to the piece in that last sentence, or in other words, information that the reader already has and doesn't need. Or if you've done it really well, you've left the reader in a position where they need to do some thinking about it and put the pieces together. And if you can do that, oh boy, you got yourself a pot roast there.
Yeah, I mean, you're identifying your proclivity to write past your ending. And so if you recognize, hey, I could probably cut this shorter and be successful more often than not, let's just make that part of the process and see if it works. And it seems to have worked. Not everybody does that though. Some people don't write far enough. And so they'll sort of stop and go, well, you get the rest. And we're like, no, what happened to Betty? So, I got pieces where no one knows what happens in the whole thing. Oh, I do like your idea of, taking the first sentence and turning it into the title as just a pure exercise. Again, that's not going to work for everybody, but I recognize why it works for many, because you're writing your way into a piece. It's especially on the first draft. You're not going to start at the perfect spot. You're going to ramp up. You need all that runway to kind of get the plane off the ground. And so you're saying, I want to start with the plane in the air because that's much more compelling. And so, no, I like that. I've never said that before. That was pretty good. Okay. That's cool. But anyway, yes, that makes a lot of sense because that way you've sort of built into your process. I'm not going to allow where I start to be where the reader starts. And I think that's really clever.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing that I like to realize about myself is, I will, it doesn't matter how long the piece is. I think one of my anxieties, and I might have talked about that here, in writing longer pieces, for example, when we're writing novels, it's like, oh my God, I got to keep track of so many details over the span of 50,000 words. Like, oh, what happened on page 10 again? It's a lot of stuff. But if I'm writing a piece that's maybe just even 100 words, I always find myself in a position, maybe I shouldn't say always, but a good amount of time when I'm like, how do I end this? I forget to just simply look up 3 lines where the whole fucking thing started and find out where it began so that I can use that. Because, that is a really great way to find your ending, is to go back to your beginning. If you really are invested in the beginning of your piece, if you've really laid it out, if you've really laid the concept out, the character, whatever's going on, the situation, and you have, Bethany Jarmel talked about this a lot when we were talking about talking to her, the turn, but we need to have that resolution of how that character or how that situation is different from the beginning. And that is something that it is laughable, maybe not at this stage of my career, because it's not like I'm winning Pulitzers, but like it's laughable how many times I forget that when I am struggling with an ending, I forget to go back and just look where it started to see how different it is in helping me craft the end, which I think is it's hilarious. It's like, Tim, it's 100 words. Look up slightly from where you're writing right now. Even if you double space it, just look up a little.
I think that is one of the top 3 pieces of advice you've ever given on the show. That is exceptional. And I'm going to put that in my back pocket and use it for the rest of my life. I think it's great because you're absolutely right. And I think what I end up doing wrong is I will start writing a story thinking it's going one way. I'll kind of catch a wave in the middle of it and go, oh no, I actually want it to go this way. And then I'll write it and I'll have this great ending. All right, well, we'll put great in quotes, but I'll have an ending that kind of fits the second half of the story. And then I'll send it to you. And I'm like, oh, look at my macaroni glitter project. And then you'll read it and go, yeah, I don't know about this ending, man. And then I'm like, no, I didn't change the beginning. So if I adopt your advice here, I will notice when I jumped ship, and oh, wait, I gotta fix the front of this because it doesn't match the back half. Yeah. That happens more than I care to admit.
Yeah. It reminds me, we're going to go back into Tim's improv vault. When you're teaching very basic improv skills to folks, in narrative improv, storytelling on stage, you try to get people to realize, look, we're not going to be writing for the Mark Twain Award of laughter and humor or whatever the hell it's called. We just want simple stories, platform, tilt, and resolution, beginning, middle, and end. And it's very deceptive when you say something very simple like that, because, when I run improv workshops, I'm always like, look, we're just looking for a platform, a tilt, and a resolution. The platform is we're mowing the lawn. The tilt is I run out of gas. How do we resolve that? And 9 times out of 10, the first kid they'll raise their hand and they'll be like, you got to call the ambulance. And you're like, okay, we need to, maybe at some point in your future career, yes, we'll call the lawnmower ambulance. But for right now, keep it simple. Keep it simple. We just get more gas. And that's the resolution. And it just sort of feels like when you're doing that, when you're improvising stories on stage, you're trying to get into people's minds to just keep it simple. A lot of people are afraid of keeping things simple in a resolution because, well, I mean, number one, it's improv. So the idea is that, you got to call Wolverine and Abraham Lincoln to help fix the problem. But the idea is that your personal story is not going to be interesting enough. That happens 99.9% of the time. People are like, well, my story isn't interesting enough, so I need to make it crazy. And It's not. So the first thing is to just simplify it and then come into, then we can start to expand once you've achieved those basics. So when it comes to a resolution, what happens if we talk about the turn? Again, like we said, we were interviewing Bethany Jarmo, and a piece has to show a turn, something that has changed. The reason that we're writing the piece in the first place is because this is a major event in the character's life, the society's life, the subject's life. And so we need to have a resolution. And so what happens if the resolution becomes an emotional resolution? And that's the thing that I think I tend to forget, is that we can have a turn. Maybe the turn is internal or external, but it's the resolution that needs to be like showcased as well. Oh, I just love it. I don't know. Yeah.
I'll tell you the ending, when we talked about payoff and how to kind of set up something and then pay it off at the end, that's where I want my focus to be, is around, from a technique standpoint, how do I do that? And so when you're looking at the work that you're doing and trying to figure out, how do I make my endings stronger? So let's start there. What makes a strong ending? It really does conclude, even if it doesn't provide perfect information on everything that's occurred, right? It doesn't wrap everything up in a nice bow, but you get, like you said, resolution on the problem of the story. So it really does, if your story doesn't have a compelling conflict, chances are it's not going to have a very good ending either. Because if you set up low stakes and then pay off low stakes, it's kind of a whimper rather than a bang. So they seem to go hand in hand, where, if you set up something that's very high conflict, that, you've got emotional investment from the reader, and now you have the opportunity to really pay that off in the plot and with the character change, at the end. But from a turn of phrase standpoint, I love your idea of kind of calling back what happened earlier in the story. you might find something in that first paragraph or first few lines that you want to bring back at the end to make sure that the reader sees, oh, okay, so verbally, they're calling back the beginning of the story, and that's kind of forcing me to see where they were at the beginning of the story and where they are now and how different that is. So it does seem like the recognition of the difference, whether it's an intellectual recognition of, oh, that person was a bigot at the beginning of the story, and then they got their ass kicked at the end of the story, and now they're having a change of heart.
Hooray.
Like, okay, that's a possibility, right? The other would be more emotional, where it's like, oh, this father is distant from the children and now has realized it, and oh, maybe it's too late for him to do anything about it, but at least he realized, what a turd he's been. So, I mean, that's a perfectly fine ending as well.
Maybe this is oversimplification, and maybe I will be lying in bed tonight wishing I hadn't said this, but there's a new standard at the end of the piece that the audience has to understand. There was an old standard at the beginning, there was a turn, and now there's a new standard. Whether that is external or internal, we have to see that the subject has to understand that or recognize that. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, I agree. And that's a great lead in. I actually wanted to read a very, 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 very short story. It's like a half-page story from Edgar Carrot, from his book, The Girl on the Fridge, which came out in the early 90s. I stumbled on this guy, a long, long time ago, and just am a big fan of his work because he gets a lot done in a very small space. Not everything he writes is micro or flash, but he gets a lot done in a very tight window. So,
I remember I sent a piece to you a while back, and you were like, you should check out Edgar Carrot. And I was like, yeah, sure, I will. And I read the story that you sent me. I can't remember what it was, but I finished that story and went, nope, can't do that. Can't do that. I need a lot. Oh, nope.
He is very skilled.
Are people sewing right now? I could sew. Maybe I could pick up doing sewing. I could sew.
He is incredibly skilled. The story I want to read is Asthma Attack. That might be the one I sent you, but it's really good. So we're going to do Asthma Attack very quickly. When you have an asthma attack, you can't breathe. When you can't breathe, you can hardly talk. To make a sentence, all you get is the air in your lungs, which isn't much. 3 to 6 words, if that. You learn the value of words. You rummage through the jumble in your head. Choose the crucial ones. Those cost you too. Let healthy people toss out whatever comes to mind, the way you throw out the garbage. When an asthmatic says, I love you, and when an asthmatic says, I love you madly, there's a difference. The difference of a word. A word's a lot. It could be stop or inhaler. It could even be ambulance. And that's the story. I love that ending because it suggests to me that the profession of love, or the expression of love, is that I love you so much that I would risk, hospitalization or worse, just to tell you how much I love you. And that's the way I interpret that story. But I've always been a huge fan of that particular piece, and it's very small.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to get into Had. No, I'm just kidding. I think that's a perfect piece that you would. I love how that ends. I love that. I agree 100% with what you said. And it's so funny that we talk about like, all right, well, how are we going to craft this? How would we end? What are some of the tricks to try and end? What are you thinking about? I love when I'm able to do something. Like, I got to be honest with you. Ever since we talked to Eric Scott Tryon, I have been reading his work, and I've been trying to do a lot of stuff like him. Seeing how he crafts the characters, seeing how his progression in short stories, because, we talked a little bit about this, about my trying to do stories that were a little bit longer. And because now I've turned 52 this month, I can't remember if we talked about that at the beginning of this year or 2025. So, memory is the first thing to go. But I just love it. And I just want to go buy more Edgar Carrot. For example, I talked about this before we started recording today. I realize I owe a large debt of gratitude to Carl Hyacin, who is an author, a very Florida-centric author that I haven't read in 20 years. And I was at the bookstore. I needed a new book, and I saw that he had a new book out called Fever Beach, and I picked it up. And thankfully, you are sometimes worried that the people that you liked when you were younger have grown up to be crazy, conservative, hardcore, super far right people. He is not. That is great. But he has such a wonderful style, a voice, I should say, in his books. When he describes characters, and just characters that are in the periphery, I realize I've stolen that from him. My Madeline Tin novel is a lot of Carl Hyacин's voice, kind of taken and adapted into how I like to present things. So that doesn't talk about endings, but it's just something because I'm looking at the book right now.
Well,
you
no.
just got to read more stuff.
Yeah, no, let's explore that. How does he end his books? How do you remember kind of the feeling or sensibility of what his endings are like?
Now I've stepped in it because it was 20 years ago and I don't. I just remember laughing a lot and wondering why they made Striptease into a movie and none of his other books, because Striptease I feel is like his weakest. Sorry, Carl. You can call me. We can discuss. But, I don't really remember. I just remember them being very, very vivid books. And see, that's the thing. As far as endings are concerned, the ones that really resonate with me are the ones that I admire and want to try and write about. The whole thing about If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino is that you have sat down to read the new Italo Calvino book. That's the basic premise. He's talking to you, the reader. And then somewhere and for some reason, your copy of If on a Winter's Night a Traveler is missing the second chapter, if I'm remembering correctly. Gosh, yeah, really sounds like I love it, huh? And so the whole book is you trying to track down this book and getting into these adventures. And it sort of wraps up in such a way, this hugely surreal book, in a way that was very, very satisfying to me. And it wasn't like a huge explosive, the Death Star blows up and we have a big, medal ceremony for all the winners. It was just, and now you could read If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino, if I'm remembering correctly. So
yeah, I think you're right.
I don't remember. I remember the voice of Carl Hyacin because it was very laid back and very funny and very interesting and detail oriented in describing these characters. And that made it enriched the world's double whammy about the seedy underbelly of professional bass fishing. Is an incredible read, but his endings obviously aren't something that I really, am crazy about. Italo Calvino, yes. Joseph Mino, who wrote a book called The Boy Detective Fails, that is an ending that I really, really like. It's just these endings that are a little off kilter, I think, is what I enjoy more.
Well, I wonder, in fairness to him, I wonder if the ending of a novel needs to have a little more denouement, a little more wrap up than the ending of a short story. Because you could see the ending of a short story, especially a very, very short story, as needing to have that emotional gut punch because that's what you're leaving the reader with. But in a novel, I very rarely have encountered a novel that sort of ends on the last page or two with something exceptional. I think that's why Gatsby sticks with me, because it does have the denouement, but it kind of has this lyricism in the last paragraph that sticks and feels like the ending of a short story, but at the end of a short novel. And I think that's why I like it so much. But yeah, I mean, novels have a lot of wrap up to do. And especially novels like that, because you have all these different character threads and you kind of have to say, Susie went off with the boyfriend and like the mom did this and the dad did this. So you kind of have to wrap all that stuff up. If we limit our conversation more to short fiction, because that's kind of where we're playing, that's the sandbox we're playing in. I wonder, for novels, you've got like conflict and then you've got the climax. And so the massive thing occurs. How much room is there, physical space on the book between the conflict resolution and the end of the book? Like there's probably a whole chapter of wrap up. But in a short story, you might actually have those things collide in the same page, of story, in the same 300 words, 200 words. So that's very interesting to think about. I hadn't really thought about that too much until just now.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm stepping away from novels right now to talk about, the whole reason that I love and am interested in writing this mal noir is because I love The Thin Man. I love Glass Onion, The Knives Out. When there's the moment comes at the end when the detective has to explain how it all worked. And some of them, there's a gazillion noirs out there. And some of them are satisfying and some of them are not. And most of them are like, sort of like, okay, I see what happened there. But like The Thin Man for me is the jewel, is the diamond, where William Powell is just, he's got everybody at a dinner table and he's like, this happened and you did this and you did that. And hey, you're not going to pin this on me. Oh, I was just saying you haven't touched your crab yet. Like this sort of laying out of the details. Now that's not the end of the story. That's just an explanation for the mystery. I don't remember. I think it's just an epilogue. So it's, when you were mentioning that novels might have a different approach to endings and the different approach than short stories, I think I would 100% agree. You have to, they're just different. Yeah.
And I keep coming back to Gatsby. I think people are going to roll their eyes because it's like, oh, he's talking about Gatsby again. But like, it's just such a great example. You've got all these different characters who have their story threads wrapped up. Tom and Daisy don't split, right? Gatsby is murdered. His business empire crumbles. His lawyer, shuffles off and goes to help somebody else, commit crimes. All these things wrap up. And the only person who really is left without, at least in my opinion, the only person who's left without kind of an ending is the narrator, Nick. And so I see the end of that book as him really trying to make sense of this nonsensical thing that he's been in the middle of. And that's why that lyricism at the end is his attempt at sort of seeing what happened and contextualizing and trying to make it make sense, as he moves on with his life. Because he's like one of the only people who shows up at Gatsby's funeral, which he finds very eye-opening considering how many people showed up to his parties. And so his kind of learning at that moment is, oh yeah, rich and popular doesn't equal satisfied and fulfilled. And so it's almost like he's absorbing that in real time. And he also has a very, if I recall, a very negative opinion of some of the people who do show up because they're doing it for the wrong reason, maybe, or they contributed to his downfall somehow. And like you almost get the sense that Nick is the only real friend that Gatsby had. And it was for a very brief moment of time. So it's like this really, again, bummer, right? So that's what really plucks the string for me is like, oh, bummer. Like, oh, that's an art ending right there. I feel like the lines that I choose to end on always have potential to be really gut wrenching or introspective. Like I like the way the intonation of the lines that I choose to end with. And where I get in trouble is that it doesn't pay off because the first part of the story, was a different story, And so if I can just develop the discipline to go back and be a little more careful about, am I setting this up properly so that it pays off? Now that I've found the payoff, let me go back to the beginning and make sure that I've planted those seeds and set that up. So I think that's what I'm going to take away from our conversation is that I need to do that more intentionally.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm remembering something, Art. I remember, we've talked about this a lot in the past about my own writing. Sometimes I have come up with the ending first. Like, oh, this is where I want to go to. This is what I want to do to have that ending, but I can't make it work. I tried so hard. And sometimes you just have to, so that's a pitfall for myself. And I'd be very interested if there are folks out there that are listening who have done that in the past and make that work for them, where they go, oh yeah, I know how I want this to resolve, and then work backwards. Almost like a memento of writing.